The outcome of a revolution was determined in the deep woods of upstate New York. Two battles fought only 18 days apart would shift the course of the Revolutionary War. These are the battles that permanently undermined British dominance in North America and set off a worldwide alliance with transformational power. Welcome to the Battles of Saratoga. Introduction. The year was 1777, and the American Revolutionary War was approaching its 2-year mark. The British, confident in their superior military might, devised a master plan to divide and conquer. Their goal: to split the rebellious American colonies in half by severing New England from the southern colonies. It seemed foolproof, a three-pronged attack designed to crush the rebellion once and for all. But something went horribly wrong. What if I told you that a series of miscalculations, bad weather, and bold decisions by underestimated American forces would lead to the downfall of an entire British army? What if a surrender here would be the catalyst for global change, drawing a powerful new ally into the fray? This is the story of the battles of Saratoga, where heroes rose, betrayals festered, and the unthinkable became reality. Chapter 1: A desperate campaign begins. From the outset, Burgoyne's campaign was plagued with logistical nightmares. The rugged terrain of New York was unforgiving. Dense forests, swamps, and steep hills slowed his progress to a crawl. The army, laden with heavy artillery and supplies, found itself bogged down, unable to move swiftly through the wilderness. What should have been a swift and decisive march became a grueling test of endurance. Burgoyne's supply lines were stretched thin, his men weary and exhausted. And to make matters worse, support from other British forces failed to materialize. General William Howe, who was supposed to march northward from New York City, had made a fatal decision. Instead of supporting Burgoyne, Howe sailed to Philadelphia in a separate campaign, leaving Burgoyne isolated and vulnerable. At the same time, British forces moving west from Lake Ontario were stopped in their tracks. The western prong of the British strategy collapsed at the siege of Fort Stanwix, and their Native American allies abandoned them after a devastating defeat at the Battle of Bennington. Suddenly, Burgoyne was alone, his grand plan reduced to a desperate struggle for survival. Chapter 2: The Americans Strike Back. On the American side, things were far from perfect. General Horatio Gates, the commander of the American forces, had just taken over from General Philip Schuyler, who had lost favor after the British captured Fort Ticonderoga earlier in the summer. The American army was growing, bolstered by militia pouring in from neighboring states, but tensions ran high within the ranks. Among Gates' officers was the fiery Benedict Arnold, a man whose name would later become synonymous with betrayal, but who was at that time one of the most brilliant and aggressive commanders in the Continental Army. Arnold's relationship with Gates was strained. Gates was cautious and preferred to defend, while Arnold, bold and ambitious, wanted to strike. Despite their differences, it would soon become clear that the American cause needed both of them. Chapter 3: The Battle of Freeman's Farm. On September 19, 1777, the first major engagement between the British and American forces took place at Freeman's Farm. Burgoyne, desperate to break through the American defenses at Bemis Heights, sent a force to flank the Americans. But Arnold, ever the tactical genius, anticipated Burgoyne's move. Arnold's men, including the legendary Daniel Morgan's riflemen, were ready. From the cover of dense trees, Morgan's sharpshooters picked off British officers one by one, creating confusion and chaos in the British ranks. Although Burgoyne managed to gain control of the field at Freeman's Farm, his victory came at a heavy cost. The British lost hundreds of men, casualties they could not afford. The Americans, meanwhile, held their ground, growing stronger as reinforcements continued to pour in. Burgoyne had gained little, and time was running out. His supply lines were stretched thin, his men were hungry and demoralized, and there was still no sign of reinforcements from New York. But worse was yet to come. Chapter 4: The Battle of Bemis Heights. On October 7th, Burgoyne, realizing that he could not hold out much longer, made a fateful decision. He would launch a final attack on the American positions at Bemis Heights, hoping to break through and reach Albany. But what he didn't realize was that the American forces had grown even stronger, now numbering nearly 12,000 men. In a dramatic turn of events, Benedict Arnold, who had been stripped of command by Gates after a bitter argument, defied orders and rode onto the battlefield. Arnold's entrance was like a spark in a powder keg. The American forces, inspired by his fearless leadership, surged forward. Arnold led a furious assault on the British lines, charging into the heart of the enemy defenses. His reckless bravery rallied the Americans and shattered the British ranks. Although Arnold was severely wounded, his charge had turned the tide. The British were forced to retreat, their lines broken, their morale shattered. Burgoyne's army was in full retreat, but there was nowhere left to run. Chapter 5: The Surrender. On October 17, 1777, just 10 days after the Battle of Bemis Heights, General Burgoyne surrendered his entire army to the Americans. Over 5,000 British and German soldiers laid down their arms in what would become one of the most significant moments of the Revolutionary War. The surrender at Saratoga sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. For the first time, the mighty British army had been decisively defeated on the battlefield. But more importantly, this victory changed the course of the war in a way that no one could have predicted. Chapter 6: The Global Impact. The victory at Saratoga convinced France that the American cause was worth supporting. Shortly after hearing of Burgoyne's defeat, King Louis XVI of France entered into formal negotiations with the Americans, leading to a crucial alliance. This alliance brought France into the war as America's most powerful ally, providing supplies, soldiers, and naval support. The conflict, once a regional rebellion, had now become a global war. The British, stretched thin across their empire, were forced to fight on multiple fronts, in North America, the West Indies, and Europe. Saratoga was the turning point. Without it, the revolution might have crumbled under British pressure. But with French support, the Americans were able to turn the tide, eventually winning their independence. The legacy of Saratoga. The battles of Saratoga were more than just military victories. They were evidence of the will of a young country. The bravery shown on these fields demonstrated that, under all the circumstances, the American spirit could not be subjugated. The Battle of Saratoga altered the path of history and produced a new country as well as motivating revolutions all around. Here on these grounds, what transpired guaranteed that the ideal of liberty would not die but rather blossom and spread like wildfire. This is the story of the battles of Saratoga, the turning point of a revolution, the moment that gave America its future, and a victory that resonated around the world. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating tales from history.